Brian Perkins here from the BHostel podcast, and we are so excited to let you know that we are going to be releasing season 3 of the show this summer, 2025. But first, we want to get you reacquainted with everything and all things BHostel by reintroducing you to the archive episodes from when we first started in November 2020 in Austin, Texas. I hope you enjoy them. All the ones that I've picked out and that the team has worked on have had the deepest messages and have resonated with all of us, and we hope they resonate with you as well. Enjoy and unpack these archived episodes with us. Let's go. Hey, Brian Perkins here. At the BHostel podcast, we're known for real, raw, and uncut stories. Trigger warning, this is one of them. It involves the death of a child, self-harm, and grief. If you're sensitive, now would be a good time to turn off this podcast.
Wow. We went back up to ICU immediately as she had this allergic reaction. They let me stay during the emergent part of it. We're trying to get her to start to compensate with her lungs and her heart rate and respiratory rate, trying to get it to go down with just nasal cannula, trying to do blow by, and eventually, they had to intubate her. And at that point, I thought we had gotten her stable.
On this episode of BHostel, we explore the grief of a mother who's just lost her child. She's tried to start a new life for herself inside of Drifter Jack's hostel in Austin, Texas. This is an archived episode. Drifter Jack's has since closed, and this woman has gone on to do miraculous and amazing things with her life. Let's unpack this episode together. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. Welcome back to BHostel. Sitting across from me is
Christy Balduf
from
Tyler, Texas.
And we're in Drifter Jack's hostel in Austin, Texas.
Mm-hmm.
So how did we get here?
Well, it started at the beginning of the year. And I was in my hometown, Tyler, Texas, and my daughter, Sophia, was 8 years old, developed a kind of persistent cough, and we couldn't really figure out what was going on with her. I was friends with her pediatrician. We worked on some stuff in the community together, and she didn't have the flu, and we weren't really sure why she wasn't getting any better. And then we decided to get a chest x-ray and found out she had a very large infection. So what I thought was just a normal childhood illness that happens in the wintertime.
How old was she?
She was 8 years old.
8 years old?
Yeah, 8 years old.
What year was this?
This was beginning of 2020, so January 2020.
Okay.
So in January 2020, she, we were in the ER, and she had a very large infection. They took her via the flights, the helicopter to Dallas. And in that emergency room, as they were treating her, they found out that she had leukemia. They just took a random blood sample. And while she was in the OR, they told us she had a particular kind of leukemia that was pretty advanced and that we would need to stay in the hospital. So for about a month, I lived in the hospital with her. It was just me and her in the home. I was a single mom, so her dad did come and visit, but this was kind of on me. So we found out when she was in the OR that it was more than just a respiratory infection, that she had leukemia, and we need to immediately move into the hospital. So we were at Children's Hospital for about a month, and so we were into February. And one night, her father had come to visit, and so I got a little bit of a break. I left and I came back, and they had asked me if they could give her another infusion of blood because she was well into her chemotherapy, and her blood counts were getting low. So after that blood, she just started to not feel well. That progressed into what looked like an anaphylactic allergic reaction.
What's the timeline? So you said from January 2020.
So January 2020, she was sick. Late January is when we were flighted. And so we were like 3.5 weeks in the hospital at this point. I had prepared for a year of living in the hospital, and then another year of treatment after that, when this was just a few weeks in to her treatment.
Okay, so the blood transfusion is only a few weeks in.
It's just a few weeks into her getting her chemotherapies. They've cleared up the infection in her lungs.
So this was full on pretty early.
Yeah. So, we found out really just in the middle of the emergency room that she had leukemia, and her pediatrician even came and visited me and was like, she didn't present the way we expected her to. I'm at my master's in health sciences, so I'm used to teaching about pathophysiology, anatomy and physiology. And so when I go to the pediatrician, she usually talks to me, knowing I have this background information. We even listened to my daughter's lungs together and didn't suspect that she was this sick. She was just compensating so well, as children do sometimes when they're sick. So it was a really big transition to go from a healthy child who was almost never sick at all. We'd never had any broken bones.
Okay.
We'd never had any major surgeries.
So there was no kind of red flags.
There was no red flags whatsoever, other than just in January, this lingering, fever and cough that just wouldn't go away. In hindsight, looking back, because she presented so differently with the respiratory illness and it wasn't flu, it could be that we'll find out later, epidemiology wise, that cases were already in the Dallas-Fort Worth area and she could have contracted COVID.
Oh, wow.
But that
I didn't even think about that.
That's what would have let us know that she had leukemia. Because if not for the respiratory illness, we wouldn't have found out about the leukemia at that time. But all that to say, it's really, I haven't gone through the autopsy to know exactly what caused her death. What we think it is she had this rare, it's not really rare. It happens when women who give birth and then people who are in chemotherapy. This is a common complication is a DIC, which is basically something where your blood both clots and you bleed out at the same time. So we went back up to ICU immediately as she had this allergic reaction. They let me stay during the emergent part of it. We're trying to get her to start to compensate with her lungs and her heart rate and respiratory rate, trying to get it to go down with just nasal cannula, trying to do blow by. And eventually, they had to intubate her. And at that point, I thought we had gotten her stable. And because I've worked in emergency rooms, I knew what this process looked like. And so at that point, they had asked me, is there anybody you want to call? And there was nobody in that moment that I felt like would give me support. It would just be a hindrance to me. So for me, I just
father, you felt
he couldn't have emotionally handled all that was going on with her. So
where is he in all of this?
Well, we were co-parents. We accidentally got pregnant together after we had dated a little while, and I was my father's cancer caretaker, and it was the end of his life. And as I was caring for him, he would just wanted to be around and there for me through the end of my father's life. And so that's the time we got pregnant. And so we didn't go into this planning to have a child. We weren't married. We weren't in a long-term relationship. And so we said, well, let's live together and try to parent together. And living together didn't work out. So when she was about 3 years old, he moved back to Fort Worth. And so we were living in a town that was about 2.5 hours away from him. So he definitely did visit. We had a good relationship.
So he was in her life.
He was in her life, definitely.
Okay.
But I was always the main parent. I made a lot of the decisions, and he was okay with that. And he also was understood that I took on a lot of that responsibility. I was the one who morphed my life around parenthood. And then he it was more of a side thing for him.
Gotcha.
Very much loved his daughter, but he didn't live with her. He didn't, he didn't know what was going on with her doctor visits or make decisions related to her school. He left all that up to me.
For lack of inquiry or just
maybe
he could
just
only handle
maturity,
so much,
like
yeah.
he was, 21 years old when we had her. And so that time he was 24 and I was older and I had already raised a child with my sister.
How old were you at the time when you met him?
I was 29.
You were 29?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So, that moment in the emergency room or in the ICU at that point, I thought she was stable. I did call him and said, okay, you need to come up here. Something's happened, but she's okay. The chaplain of the children's hospital was sitting with me and, I kind of relaxed a little bit. And then I got up to walk to the bathroom and I look over and her heart rate was flatlined. So she had coded.
Oh, wow.
And so I was just in a very surreal moment at that time. I didn't expect any of this. Knowing she had leukemia, yes, but I didn't expect just within a matter of, at that point, I don't know, maybe 2 hours from the time she started to tell me her stomach hurt and she just didn't feel well, to that she had flatlined. And so I watched that and I watched them go through the code. And again, I've worked in an emergency room, so I know, after they've tried to restart the heart twice and after they've given the 3 different medications and then they've pushed and, nothing is happening. I knew at that point, and I remember the chaplain was standing beside me. Or at that point, it was one of the pediatric oncologists who was standing with me because he hadn't arrived yet. And I looked up and I was thinking about how long the code had been going on, and I knew she had permanent brain damage at that point. And so I looked over and I couldn't remember at what point that we, when a code is ran in the emergency room, there is a point where they know that there is not much hope left, but they continue to try. They did try to put her on bypass.
Were you allowed to stay in the room?
I was
this
allowed to
entire
be there the
time?
whole time, which was very difficult, but I was very thankful because at that point I started to pray and I started to talk to her. And I asked her to please not leave, but I told her if she had to leave, that I would be okay and that she needed to do whatever she had to do, but please don't leave me. Please don't leave me. But again, I knew at that time what the body had gone through. And so as I watched them, slow down, people had been lined up to do chest compressions. I watched the ICU and the oncology and the ER physicians start to slow down. And I knew what that meant. And no one had told me that she was gone, but I had been there for other people going through that. And I knew they just weren't saying it to me yet.
At any point in time before she coded, had you thought to prepare yourself for the worst?
No, because whenever they told me she had leukemia, they told me she had an 80% survival rate. I really expected that if I would have to prepare for her death, it would be after our initial rounds of chemo, the remission, to see if remission held. It was very like, yes, she has cancer, but leukemia is very treatable and we've come a long way in the last few years.
Exactly.
So I was prepared for living with an ill child, and I was prepared for adapting my life to what we would have to do to get her through treatment and years of waiting. But I didn't realize that she would be gone in a matter of hours. So,
and in the midst of that, looking back on it, did you feel any sense of selfishness? Was there any guilt attached to that, or had that not crossed your mind? Asking
I
her
think
not to
that
leave.
whenever I started to beg her to stay, I thought, not for me. My first impulse was to say, please, I can't live without you.
Got you.
But then I realized if we were in a situation that she was about to die, I didn't want her to to harm herself from me.
Mm.
And so that's why I, you know, I just, all I can call it is prayer, because we don't really have a great word for what it is to talk to the spirit or soul of another person when they're not conscious.
Do you
We
believe
use
as
the
though
word prayer.
do you believe as though she heard you?
I do. I very much, at that point, as I was saying that, I didn't know, because I didn't know what would happen. But once I kind of went in and they let me go in with her, and I could see her. I could see her body and see that her spirit was not in her body, but still felt present. I waited for him to get there, and I told him that she's gone. I knew they were going to ask me.
Her father.
Her
You waited for
father.
her.
Yeah, her father's name is Victor, and I waited for Victor before I said anything. But I knew that they were waiting for the shock of it to wear off for me enough to ask me if they could unplug her from the bypass machine. It's funny how when I tell another person, it's hard to explain how I knew all these things, but I knew
Mhm.
that was what was happening. So I got very peaceful, because I thought, she is still here and I have to help her not be afraid of what's happening.
Mm.
So I sat by her and I held her hand, and he called his family, and they came, and I called my family, who was a couple hours away, and they eventually came, and we were able to stay with her. They turned the ICU room into all I can describe as a hospice room. When my father passed, that's what they did for him. Was they had a room for us that we were allowed to sit with him as he passed on, and decide when we were ready to leave his body.
Mm.
Thankfully, I had already been through having to organize his passing on, to understand, like how to call a funeral home and arrange for her body to be taken for cremation, and how to, to
So you wanted
know
to have her
what I would need to
cremated
ask for.
instead of buried. Oh wow.
So I think that what got me here to the hostel, and why this is pertinent to why I'm in a hostel, is that surviving motherhood, unexpected motherhood, and then surviving PTSD and anxiety and depression, which I already was dealing with before having a child. I already knew what it was to have suicidal thoughts and to want to not live. And I knew what those warning signs were when you were really not wanting to live anymore. And it wasn't just a thought, because it is more common than people think to think about suicide when people are depressed. They do think about suicide. That doesn't mean they're going to attempt it. I do actually have an attempt in my background. So paired with that, I have training in mental health first aid, and I work in public health. So I knew that I needed something that would keep me going, because I knew that I was going to really face not wanting to live without her, since my whole world, she was the center of my world. So I laid down with her, and I promised her that I would not leave this place, that I would not leave Earth, that I would continue here no matter what happened. So once I made that promise to her, I knew that I had to build things into my life that would make me live. So travel became what my brain latched onto. When she passed away, a lot of my friends were nervous that I told them I'm going to move out of this house. I had a nice home, a little 2-bedroom in a quiet neighborhood that had a great school district. We had friends with age peers that she played with in the neighborhood. I was really lucky in getting to parent in a single parent home and still give her a pretty traditionally idealistic childhood. She had a backyard. She was able to ride her bike in the neighborhood. She knew her neighbors, and the teachers at her school, we were at an art academy and they held community events like right down the street from our house.
So
And
let me not to
yeah.
cut you off. So when you speak of community, when you speak of her knowing her neighbors, how did you see a show of support from that same community after her
Oh,
passing? And if
absolutely.
so,
Yeah. I don't think I would have survived the first few days or been able to have her memorial the way I wanted without that, because this was, the first cases of COVID were on the West Coast at the time we were in the hospital. So as she was passing, as we were getting a memorial together, it was literally quarantine time, and the quarantine was about to commence on that Friday or that Saturday, and it was Friday, and I don't have I don't have a church that I wanted to hold any sort of spiritual service in for her, because when my father passed, my sister had a pastor who volunteered to run a service for him, and I asked him not to proselytize during the service, and he did,
oh,
and that was a very that made it very difficult for me to trust that any sort of clergy or pastor or priest would honor my wishes.
mhm.
That I didn't want her passing to be a way for them to preach about God. And in fact, we have a lot of Christian friends that did support me through this, but I didn't want that to be the center, because that's not how I didn't raise her in a Christian tradition. I raised her in a,
Why was that important? Why was that important to you to keep her away from the Christian faith in that
because
sense?
we lived in the Bible Belt. And so Christian beliefs are often attached to power where I'm from.
Mm,
And belief systems that are upheld by systems of power, like you need to believe this or you don't really fit in our community.
mhm,
Um, I have a big problem with that.
mhm.
I have very strong spiritual beliefs. Wasn't I was not mm, hard to articulate this. My grandparents were part of a doomsday cult, and so I was taught I was forced to regurgitate certain beliefs
Mm,
to my family growing up, and my parents kind of just succumbed to the will of my grandparents. Um, but I was a very strong-willed child, and so I thought, well, I'm going to go find the truth. So I did, for a long time, go to different Christian churches, Baptist, Methodist, Jehovah's Witness, Mormon, and kind of went around and figured out like which one do I fit. So for my teen years, I was very strongly Christian. But then as got into college and started to um, study what causes people to be unhealthy or healthy,
mhm,
and I learned that it was less about an individual's choices and more about the social cultural context in which they live,
mhm.
and how things like race and class and gender matter a whole lot in terms of whether or not you can live out a healthy life. Those things, when applied to the area that I'm from, uh, one of the first questions you're asked is, what church do you go to? And if you don't have a good answer, this can impact who lets you know a new job is coming up or whether
Mm,
you get invited to certain places. And I didn't like that attachment of spirituality to power, because what I saw in power differences was the state of, or the source of unhealth in
mhm.
humans.
Makes sense.
And
And you
so for
wanted
me,
to
those two were incompatible.
protect your daughter from
And
that.
I wanted to protect my daughter from being told that she had to believe a certain thing. And I knew that that's what many of her peers and many of her peers' parents um, in our town and in our region of East Texas believed. So I sought out friends in a school system where people didn't do that.
Gotcha.
I did have friends that were very strongly personally Christian. They had those spiritual beliefs, and we didn't have a problem because I knew the Bible very well. And I
Mhm,
do actually believe, teachings of Jesus. I believe teachings of the prophets. It's just, I didn't want the particular vein of this is the way things have to be for all people to be taught to my child. I
Uh,
just, for me, that was, um, you don't take something sacred and force, you don't
you don't
use it
attach
as an
agenda to
oppressive
it.
mechanism
Yeah,
for
yeah,
others.
exactly. I could see that. So fast forward is you're here, you're in
Hmm.
this hostel, you've had your community support you
Hmm.
in moving out of that environment that you were familiar with, and now you're here.
Yeah. This is just the tail end of a journey that I decided I'm going to go on the road. I'm going to visit as many beautiful places as I can. And by beautiful, I mean um, full of life. I got into health because I loved science and I loved nature. And so I was like, I'm going to go west and go out into the desert and see these, places that I've read about in books and never had the chance to go see. I'm going to go up into the mountains. I'm going to go to the ocean. Uh, she and I traveled every summer, and I took her to places where we could do lessons about the earth and animals and water and all the things that sustain us as human beings. And so I needed to continue that in my life so that I would have something that held my attention to know that goodness existed in the world and that the value of beauty itself and nature were going to be the reminders to me that I needed to stay here and exist on this earth.
Mhm. How have you come to execute some of those things that you've wanted to do living here?
So, living here it does allow me to get out in nature some. I think that living here is the tail end of, well, I can't travel anymore. I've kind of run out of money to, buy food without having a job. Uh, Let me land somewhere that there are places that I can go out and hike and I can go into parks and be around water and start to figure out what is next in my life.
And I noticed that you've taken on some extracurricular things in and around the Austin area.
Mhm.
Um, what are those things, and have they added to your sense of peace or added to your ways of coping, or are they just things to take your mind off of?
I think a little bit of taking my mind away from the feeling of lack or the feeling of what I know that anchors me is no longer there. So I need to distract myself. So that's a little bit. But I think the things you mentioned, I go to a drum circle on Sundays and I dance at that drum circle. I think the other side of this, besides just keeping myself distracted, is reminding myself who I was before I was a mother. Being a single mother means I had to be breadwinner and caretaker and decision maker in my home. So there was little time to think about the things that interested me or what I was passionate about. So I started drawing and painting again. I've started dancing again, going to drum circle for that. Um, Hiking, it was something I did with her, but now I actually get to go out and meditate in nature. Those are things that are coming back into my life because it really was a part of who I was before motherhood took over all of my time.
Mhm.
Now I have an abundance of time, but it's almost like I've forgotten. I forgot that I used to love to read fiction books. I love fantasy and sci-fi series. Um, and I haven't done it in years. And so now I think that making myself get out and do things around Austin is reminding me of parts of myself that have been long dormant.
Mm. Now, we're going to thank you for sharing.
Mhm.
And I hate to wrap up the conversation, but I want to wrap it up with a very important question
Mhm.
to others who have experienced the loss of a child, and they are searching for ways in which they can continue to live on. What would you say to them?
I would say to talk to them as if they were still here and ask them what they would want you to do. Um, I carry around uh, a dragon toy of a book series she was into, young adult. science fiction books. And so I carry around her dragon, Glory the Rainwing, and she travels with me wherever I go. And I've started to draw and think about, different places that Glory could go in my drawings. I would say that honoring the things that they loved um, is a way to think about how they would want you to continue on with the connection that you have with them.
And that's beautiful. And I thank you again for sharing. Can you please let everybody know your name one more time?
My name is Christy Balduf from Tyler, Texas.
Thank you. I hope you enjoyed that episode. I hope you learned a little bit. I hope, at the very least, you got to experience somebody else's story of hope, setback, triumph, and perseverance. Come back with us next time, and we'll unpack another one. And that's it for this check-in. I'm Brian Perkins. This has been the BHostel podcast, where every story starts with a backdrop, a bunk claim, and a new chapter waiting to be written. And if you felt something from this episode, or just vibe with the journey, do me a solid. Like, subscribe, drop a comment, and share it with someone who needs a little hostel wisdom in their life. This story, just like most of the ones we tell, came straight from travelers like you. Got a wild experience, a hard truth, or a moment that changed everything? Hit me up at BHostelPod.com. Let's get your story out into the world. And don't forget, BHostel is more than a YouTube channel. We've got a podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever else you tune in. We go even deeper there. Unfiltered hostel tales, uncut lessons, and real stories from the road that we sometimes can't even post here on the channel. Major shout out to our supporters and subscribers. You keep this show moving from bed to bunk, city to city. If you want to support the pod, subscribe, leave a review. That's it for now. Until the next check-in, be well, trust the process, and as always, you be the storyteller.